Good evening, and welcome to part 3 of our 3-part series on opioid addiction, treatment, and recovery. I am Deacon Bernard Butler of St. Timothy Missionary Baptist Church, located at 7101 Carnegie Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio, where I currently serve as the Acting Executive Director of the Light of Cleveland Incorporated, a community development corporation created by St. Timothy to address the challenges and issues we face in our community. Today's session is named Opioid Treatment and Aftercare. We pray that this entire series has been a blessing to our community, and we look forward to the next opportunity to serve our community. Well, now let's get started.
Joining us in our recording today as we engage in our final educational offering regarding opiate addiction with a focus on treatment, aftercare, and recovery. I'm excited today to have with me Dr. Michelle Farvar, a great psychiatrist and someone I consider an esteemed colleague and friend. Just to disclose, I have worked with this young man in many capacities, such as a clinician and a senior administrator, and I have seen him provide clinical care firsthand and was overwhelmed with his level of compassion and extensive knowledge in psychiatry and in matters of addiction. Actually, he has helped shape the way I look at the disease of addiction and development of my treatment approach with this specific population. I appreciate what I've learned, but I am always in pursuit of more information and continued growth. So we have another opportunity, my friend, up close and personal. So welcome, Dr. Farvar.
Thank you so much for that glowing introduction. I hope that I can live up to it.
You will.
And help people with their addiction issues and their families. Thank you so much.
So today we will share clinical information and hopefully not get too technical. The last time you will hear this from me, I do not believe any true discussion or learning can be had without some sharing of information, exchange of thoughts, ideas, and experiences related to the subject matter. Treatment for opiate addiction is very critical for this community. Today we plan to build on our previous educational series regarding community resources, looking at opiate addiction as a disease process, and finally today to look at treatment options and dialogue about aftercare and recovery options. In our exchange of information, we hope to enlighten and provide actual hope. And we are going to try something different with this last segment. I like this idea. I must say it's brilliant, even if I came up with it myself. And it's actually a segment called Ask the Doctor. And so we will have people text or email in to this session. Actually, we started this in previous Zoom appointments, and they will give us questions, and we'll take our hand at trying to answer some of those questions. These were individuals who have experienced addiction or struggled with some kind of, trouble in the family with someone who has been addicted. And so they have some unanswered questions. Hopefully we can provide some answers. So let's take care of some of the housekeeping items, and then we'll jump into the business at hand. This presentation is being hosted by the Light of Cleveland Corporation, an LLC affiliated with St. Timothy Missionary Baptist Church of Cleveland, Ohio. I am proud that the body of Christ has agreed to come to the table and hold a dialogue about addiction and the things how it impacts the church and the community. This is a faith-based initiative with underwriting by the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. By the way of introduction, I am Jeff Sims, a psychiatric nurse practitioner specializing in adult psychiatry, and I do provide treatment for those who struggle with addiction. And we do have a physician in the house, Dr. Farvar. And so why don't you take a few moments right now and introduce yourself and greet the people.
Okay. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking me to join you. I really feel that the mission of what you are doing is in line with Christianity as I understand it, which is to help the people, to enlighten the people, and to alleviate suffering. I myself am born and raised in Canada. I grew up in the city of Toronto. Toronto, as some people may know, is an extremely diverse city. All ethnicities and cultures are there. Unlike, as they say in the United States, being a melting pot, in Canada, at least in Toronto, we were encouraged to keep our cultures. So I am from a mixed background. I have about 5 different ethnicities in my background. While that doesn't familiarize me with everybody else's culture in great detail, it opens up my mind at least to the possibilities. I subsequently studied at the McMaster University as an undergraduate. Then I went on to study medicine at the University of Brussels in Belgium. After that, I came back to Canada, and it took me a little time. I was able to get a residency here in Cleveland, Ohio, at Metro Health Medical Center. I did 2 years of internal medicine, followed by 3 years of psychiatry, and then after that I joined North Coast Behavioral, which is the psychiatric state hospital in Summit County. And that's where we met. Initially I was a clinician on the unit, followed by becoming the chief clinical officer for the civil division of that hospital, which I did for 8 years before going off to Oregon for an additional 4 years, and then coming back to Ohio and working in many different healthcare settings, both general hospitals, private, semi-private, freestanding psychiatric, university hospitals, and now where I'm currently working is Cleveland Clinic Akron General.
Wow. So you have a diverse background, and you've been around, and you're right, we kind of met at a state facility. So this struggle with opiate addiction is not new to us. It actually is something that stands, out front for us. And so let's dive into some of the questions that have come up and kind of get our hands around this discussion about opiate addiction and treatment. So let's start this discussion with the first step of a decision to seek treatment for opiate addiction. What I've experienced is the person is usually in a crisis and unsure about their decision to engage in treatment. They actually state, I don't think I have a problem. So how do you deal with these individuals that have this ambivalence or reluctance? Help support them in their plan to move towards treatment and to engage with you as a provider.
Well, I think when a person shows up and is engaged with a healthcare provider and says that they don't have a problem, and yet they're sitting before you, that contrast has to be explored. You do that by asking some very simple open-ended questions. Now, as some people may be aware, one of the most common approaches is to use a thing called motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing is a kind of language for change. It's not unique to addictions, it's not unique to behavioral health or any kind of health care for that matter. It can be used for job interviews, it can be used for a whole bunch of things. But basically, the language of change is to explore what exactly is a person looking for. Because maybe, in order to achieve that goal, whatever it may be, a college degree, sustaining a family, so on and so forth, may require that they become sober. So the first issue is not necessarily sobriety in their mind. It may be another goal, but a family member or somebody important to them, somebody that they value, is nudging them towards making a decision about their addictive behaviors.
It could be a court.
It could,
or
yes, absolutely.
A heavy hand, not just the wife
it can
or
be
a significant other. It could be a court.
Right, but and I've seen that change take place in a lot of people who, initially being quite resentful of a judge who diverts them away from a short jail sentence off to a rehabilitative chemical dependency program, and you'll get that initial resentment. But many people, if they're honest and they're actually willing to work with you and explore that, they usually come around to admitting that, yes, indeed, they do have an addiction, and yes, their life would be better off if it were under control.
So here's another kind of thing that I see quite frequently. So it's that reluctance, that ambivalence, and then, it's like a child or a toddler learning to walk.
Yeah.
They fall.
Yes.
And so
Right.
what about those who have an opiate addiction and they relapse? And I look at relapse as part of the journey.
Yes.
But how do you handle that individual who's starting to walk in treatment and they continue to fall, or they fall the first time?
Well, there's a lot of ways to approach that. One is to examine a person's life before they even had an addiction and how they felt before they ever acquired their addiction.
Oh, okay.
And if they can remember what that was like to be free of an addiction, free of having to worry about withdrawal, free of having to secure the money that they need to keep it going, free of the legal complications and all the other things that go with it. So that's one approach, is to have them think about that. Another one is to educate, because let me preface this a little bit. A lot of people will say that they don't think that having an addiction is an issue of a quote-unquote disease. They think of it as, well, I just have a problem with my willpower. Or I'm treating something with this substance. I've tried psychiatric medications. They make me feel terrible. This stuff makes me feel good. Why on earth do you want me to take drug X when I can just take this and I feel fine? So, we need to educate that there are physical, psychological, and societal consequences to the drug use. The drug use affects not only them, it affects their family, it affects all of the people surrounding them, it affects the community at large, and it perpetuates trauma from generation to generation. A lot of times people may not necessarily care about that at the time. They may not necessarily see it that way. They may just see their suffering and see that they want to treat their suffering. So for them, it's maybe a much simpler equation than for someone like us, who's engaged in trying to persuade someone to make healthier choices.
Right. So do you agree that relapse is a part of the journey?
Absolutely.
For the person who is struggling with opiate addiction?
Absolutely. And so when a person, is unable to stop, let's say where they're able to stop for a while, and then they relapse and they stop and they relapse and they stop, those things happen for a reason. And part of the education about addiction is to help people understand those things. Now, this may come as a surprise to some, but we have to understand that when we have other doctors and healthcare providers, nurses, and social workers, and so on, you'll hear some of them say it's a willpower issue. You'll hear some of them say, I don't understand how this is a disease. And I can tell you in all honesty, the textbook of addiction medicine that I have on my desk, you could use it as a training weight. It's about 10 pounds and it's about this thick. All right. So just to give some respect to the fact that in order to really understand it as a disease is not a simple thing. And to translate that to somebody who may not understand the kind of science that went into that, or somebody who is never educated in those things, or somebody who doesn't trust, doctors and institutions and so on, to try and translate that for them can be pretty challenging. And the only way to do that, in my opinion, is through compassion, to show that you care about this person, that you want the best for this person. It isn't, but you don't own their addiction. I didn't cause it, you didn't cause it, but they came in looking for something. And, and why would you give them any less help than you would your own family member?
That's right.
So, if you care about humanity, you'll do the right thing for them.
That's a great way to look at it. It's this whole thing of kind of drawing them in with compassion.
Right, because they don't have to understand the details of the science unless they want to. But they don't have to know that in order to recover.
One thing that I struggle with is this relapse and then reluctance.
Yes.
To kind of engage fully
yes.
in treatment.
Right.
And so the question becomes, have you ever decided to stop treatment with a person because of a lack of success? And then it's, how do you measure success? I have more, but go ahead.
Right.
You can
no,
take a
the
stab
answer
at
is
that.
no.
Okay.
But there are details. First of all, if a person fails to maintain a sobriety, in my experience, the vast majority of the time, it has been because we did not identify or anticipate what was going to derail their sobriety. It could be a using partner. It could be, family dysfunction, if you will. It could be physical pain. It could be any of a number of things that brings a person back to using substances. Number two, that person may frequently take those quote-unquote failures, which they're not actually, okay? They take those quote-unquote failures as evidence that they are unable to change, and it will make them even more reluctant to try again. The reality is that even though you can consider a relapse to be failure, in reality, you have actually made progress each time you've had a sobriety. In the same way that every time you lost a sobriety, you lost some ground. That's true. But every time you had a sobriety, you made gains. You made gains in insight. You made gains in friendships. You repaired relationships with family. You did things. You got employed. You did something that improved your life and the life of people around you. And you'll remember that. So that's important. The other thing, okay, so did we ever kind of quote-unquote kick somebody out of treatment? Not for inability to maintain sobriety. Because what you then do is you reconfigure the treatment. You say, this approach didn't work, so we probably want to go towards residential this time around. Or we're going to go to replacing the drug that you're using with Suboxone or methadone or something like that, or naltrexone. Now, there are circumstances where people have been kicked out of treatment. Now, usually, in those circumstances, and I think, speaking a little bit more towards the women who understand how this goes, there are people who gravitate towards treatment programs with the goal of abusing other people. That has to be taken into account. There are people with predatory instincts. Sometimes we don't say predatory, just survival instincts, but, where they take advantage of vulnerable people. And it's important that when you're in a program, that sometimes people's survival instincts translate as predatory. The person may not be a sociopath. They may not be a real predator. But, they are in such a habit of kind of just taking what they can get from vulnerable people around them that they do that even to people who don't need to be treated that way, or even when they don't have to do that. And so occasionally people will encounter a toxic environment in treatment and then use that as a reason, I went there, but then this man did this and that to me, or he stole this and that from me, and, I thought this person was my friend, and then they exploited me, and so on and so forth. Now, that's not necessarily strictly anybody's fault, but in those environments, we have people who have suffered a great deal and who have lived a life on the street, and they may be tough, and they may have certain attitudes towards others that are unproductive. And when we do encounter somebody who is outrightly destructive and abusive to other people, we sometimes have to ask them to leave because they're jeopardizing the lives and sobriety of others.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what I recall in treatment is this how do you, or bringing the client's family or significant other in to help, support them, and even to develop a plan, so we're talking about treatment options, a plan when they move from one state of treatment to another state of treatment.
Right.
So as you talked about, like inpatient, maybe bringing them in to kind of develop a plan before they reconnect or rejoin the community. So what do you think about, or do you value? It used to be something that was a must, but now it's kind of changed. So do you value bringing in the family and significant others?
Right.
Into
so that's a loaded question, because it's kind of like crossing the DMZ in Korea. It's full of landmines, and you never know what you're going to stumble into.
That's true.
And there used to be these television programs. You may recall these programs, but intervention. They get the whole family together, and they get the interventionist. They sit on the couch, and they tell Joe. So apologies to anybody named Joe out there. It's not. Hey, your family is not going to do anything for you unless it's directed towards recovery. They're not going to loan you any money. They're not going to drive you around. They're not going to bail you out of jail. They're not going to do any of that stuff unless you're in recovery. And that is a very powerful effect. And I have to tell you something that I've learned by doing psychiatry for 20 years. And it seems really obvious to me, but for some reason we never think this way. But I like to joke with the medical students and residents and say, like, do you see any fangs? No. Do you see any fur? No. Any claws? No. None of that. I can't run very fast. My sense of smell is not better than that of a dog or a bear. And yet, here we are as human beings, the most populous type of animal living in the world, if you want to call us animals. But why is that? And, people will say, well, that's because of our brains. We have this ability to problem solve like no other creature on earth can do. And you might say, well, God gave us this incredible ability to use these blessed minds that we have. But there's another piece that people forget. You don't need to be the smartest creature on earth, but you need to bond with your peers. It is our ability to bond that we, as creatures without all these, survival tools, can become the dominant species on the planet Earth. So why is that important? Well, the reason why that's important is because who do we bond more with than our families? Who motivates us to change more than our grandmother or our mother or our father or our brother? They are the most important people in our lives because we bond with them on a deep and profound level. We share something with them that we can't even put words to. They're the ones who make us cry. Right? So our ability to bond is the most powerful thing in a human being's life. It's more powerful than anything else. Now there's one exception, and that is addiction. Because when the addiction hijacks your brain,
there you go.
Okay, it takes over the center of your brain that says, what is number one? Heroin starts climbing up there and takes the top of the pyramid and sets itself down and tells everybody else, well, the rest of you are not so important. This is number one. And it's reinforced through all the physical sickness that comes every time you can't. And what people don't always understand is that no matter what kind of medical issue you go through, okay, whether that's physical sickness of withdrawal, whether that's physical sickness of a toothache, doesn't matter what it is, it has psychological consequences on you. So if you have a bad toothache, tonight, and you can't get to a dentist, and you suffer all night long, and you finally, you're able to get yourself to a dentist tomorrow, the next time you start feeling that, you're at the dentist right away. You're not waiting, right? Okay? So long story short, all of that is to say that, yes, the family is immensely important. However, because we're so bonded to our families, when it goes wrong, it can go wrong in a major way. So it's important to understand, is the family, including wives and children, are they partly why I'm using drugs? So in other words, if I've been abused and I suffer from serious post-traumatic stress disorder, I have nightmares, I have flashbacks all the time, I can't walk past granddad's house. I can't go through neighborhood X because I saw something over there. You know, if I can't do those things because I'm a traumatized person and the drug makes me feel good, it makes me forget all that, I'm going to stick with the drug. And you tell me, well, you go to the family. Well, the family, I've been beaten up and, you know, so certain members of the family, you have to ask this person, who in your family do you trust? Who do you love? Who loves you? Who is the most disappointed person that you're not sober right now? Those are the kinds of people you got to talk to. And then if they tell you, yes, these are the people that are important to me, do you want me to call them? Do you want to bring them on in? Do you want to have a conversation about, you know, the impact that the drug has had on your life and theirs? Then yes, I would say yes. But if you're going to awaken old wounds and cause them to revert back to using and destroy the sobriety that's fragile, I'd say no.
I think so. All right. Well, that actually was very helpful, and I think you kind of pointed out some key, you know, things there. One is that, you know, the drug can take a place of preeminence,
yes,
where it's, you know, it's more...
and we have proof of that. I don't know if people are familiar with the experiments, but, you know, when they were studying addiction about 40, 50 years ago, they got these little rats, right? And they put a little probe in their brain, and they called it EBS, electrical brain stimulation, and it would cause pleasure in the rat. Okay, the same way that cocaine causes pleasure in the mind of an average person. So do a lot of other things besides cocaine, like cheese and good coffee. Yeah. But to get serious, you know, the EBS, you put that on the rat, and then every time the rat pushes the lever, it gets EBS. So, you know, you could put the rat's favorite food there, water, all the things it needs to, and you know that rat will keep pushing that bar. It won't eat, it won't sleep, it won't drink
because of that,
until it collapses, and the rats would die from it. That tells you how powerful these drugs are.
That's right.
So one of the things that I was taught when I was learning about addiction in residency training back at Metro in the good old days was to have respect for how powerful the substances are and the effect that they have on us. It's not a matter of willpower. This is a different beast altogether.
So let's move from that phase of like treatment and those things that we've seen in treatment to like aftercare.
Yes.
And I want to talk about what they call MAT programming, or medication assistance treatment,
right?
And discuss its value. So we talked about, you know, treatment inpatient in one segment, outpatient, and how it has really been effective.
Right.
But this model medication assistance treatment, talk about the value of that kind of programming.
Okay. So a lot of people who are familiar with addiction will understand that there have been these, what we in mental health care like to call psychosocial treatment. Psycho meaning psychotherapy, social meaning a group, a family, and so on. And, you know, a lot of that started with AA. And AA did amazing things for people. Yes. It was, you know, a revolution in society to have AA. And AA, in spite of all the great things that it has done, has its detractors, it has its critics, because let's face it, nothing is perfect. You know, so if I give you a medication for high blood pressure, it's got side effects. Well, there's no difference, you know, when it comes to MAT. It is not perfect. But MAT has one unique difference, and I'm going to explain that and why. Right now, all the big pharmaceutical corporations are looking at the holy grail, which is to find something that treats cocaine addiction the same way, amphetamine addiction the same way, alcohol, we can use benzodiazepines, you know, everyone's familiar with Ativan, Klonopin, Xanax.
They call them Xan bars.
Xanny bars, compressed and high dose, you know. But what's unique about MAT is because we were discussing at one point, not on this show, but previously, about, you know, what are the goals of treatment? Well, the addiction epidemic of opioids and opiates is killing people at an astronomical rate. And people are getting introduced to these drugs through weed, through cannabis. The drug dealer sells it to you, and they put stuff in it. Right. You don't even know.
Right. Lace.
And they lace it, and people are dying from this or getting severely ill. I'm seeing this all the time in the hospital. So they get introduced to it, and these drugs are extremely dangerous. So it's killing people a lot all over the country. So the first thing about MAT to remember is that MAT, or the use of Suboxone, okay, it's a combination of two drugs, buprenorphine and naloxone in combination. The naloxone is an anti-opiate drug. If I inject, let's say you're addicted to heroin, and I inject you with naloxone, you're going to go into immediate withdrawal, catastrophic, horrible withdrawal. You're going to suffer immensely, okay? But when you take it by mouth, nothing, no effect. So Suboxone is buprenorphine, which is an opioid, and naloxone. But the naloxone doesn't do anything to you unless you try to inject it. So that you don't play with it and try to cook it up and try to shoot it into your arm or something. Because if you do that, you're going to go into withdrawal. Now, buprenorphine itself is not as powerful as some of the other drugs. So if you're using heroin and your last dose was yesterday and you go on, buprenorphine, you're going to experience some withdrawal, and so on. The reason why we use it is because it saves lives. Because what happens is, not only does it stop or reduce the severity of the withdrawal, which is not necessarily going to kill you, but it's going to make you really sick, but it replaces the drug. It replaces the fentanyl. It replaces the heroin. It replaces the Dilaudid. It replaces these super powerful drugs so that you don't have to steal to get it. You don't have to give up your child's lunch money for this drug. You don't have to do any of that because you're getting it prescribed to you.
So MAT is one part of it is the medication to stop you from using or to overdose. But there's also these other components like groups.
Well, right, because the recommendation officially is, and if you look at the major websites like SAMHSA, which I can never pronounce, but the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration has a website that'll detail all these things for you. They're actually very good. It's SAMHSA, SAMHSA.gov. And the official recommendation is always to give MAT with the psychosocial treatment. The reason for this is that the psychosocial treatment has a component to it, which is the learning environment, and it has the motivational component to it, which is the bonding with your fellow person who helps you to see yourself. Because there's an old saying, the eye does not see itself, right? So we see ourselves through our interactions with other people. They enlighten us about us. So when you go to group and you're talking a line of nonsense to somebody else who's an addict, that's right. Yeah. They'll call you out on it and say, well, what you're saying is completely, I'll use kinder language, is completely false.
False.
I know, that's right. So without that, you're just getting a prescription, and that doesn't help you repair your life. Because one of the goals of staying on MAT is to give you time to repair your life, to no longer have the physical consequences, the injections, the sickness, to no longer have to be in the hospital, it helps you go to work, it helps you be normal with your family. All of that starts to repair. And when your life repairs, then you can talk about whether to stay on MAT or not.
So one of the things we talked about in like the community resources, we talked about a lack of, we don't have enough resources like MAT programs or providers or whatever to provide the treatment. And so that's why I brought it up. Like, Metro is doing this great service. It's called Motivation and Engagement Clinic. And it's on, and I see it right here.
I see it right there too. Yeah.
Tuesday and
That's
Thursday,
right.
1
Right.
to 4 p.m., where people who might want treatment and can't get in
Right.
to a provider to,
Right.
kind of start MAT, which is the not just the medication, but again, the
That's right.
programming. I think there's a marriage between the two.
There is.
That needs to occur.
I feel I have to throw one statistic at you.
Okay, go ahead.
Because this statistic is so powerful that I think everyone needs to hear it at least once. So if I have an addiction to an opioid and I go into treatment and I get sober, all right? Now with the usual psychosocial treatments that we talked about, group and all that kind of stuff, my sobriety, the survival of my sobriety at 1 year is 12%. You want to know what it is with MAT?
What?
Above 85%.
Wow.
That is a huge, huge difference. If we see that in another branch of medicine like cardiology,
We'll go.
that's a miracle.
Yeah, exactly.
That's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
That is a miracle when you see something like that. That's why MAT saves lives.
Right.
I wanted to throw that out there. Now, the other thing is that's timely as to what you're saying is that, there was the huge lawsuit that we've all heard about on the radio and on television, NPR, those kinds of stations. And they talk about, the lawsuit against the opioid producers. I think it was Purdue Pharma, and there was a big payout. And the payout went to all the states, and that money got divvied up amongst all the counties to treat addiction. So, Cuyahoga County got some, Summit County got some. So I'm in the Summit County end of it, and we got some money to treat addictions. And what they chose to do was to pull out all the stops, get all these doctors in the ER, in the clinics, the nurse practitioners, everybody licensed to do MAT, and to get people on Suboxone, because that's what's going to stop the dying.
And I don't want to run out of time because we still
I
have
wasn't,
a segment.
yeah.
But let me just
okay.
say something about what you just said. So, I understand, having more providers to help in this fight is important. There is something to be said about having providers who are convinced that this is the right type of treatment.
Yes.
Because I think we all know that, so you don't want a client, and we'll talk about that and Ask the Doctor, because that's one of the questions that we'll talk about. Like, hey, I want to go to someone who really believes that I can get better and believes that this is the right,
And I have to, apologize on the behalf of the medical profession to all of the people who have dealt with a cynical, angry provider who has rolled their eyes, wrinkled their nose, shook their head, and walked out of a room and made a comment about how this person with an addiction is never going to make it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And it goes back to that statement that you made, that it's just a matter of their willpower or lack thereof.
Yeah, because just like the rest of the population in this world, doctors, nurse practitioners, we're all human beings. Right. And, we don't always believe that the profession can do what it professes to be able to do. And for those who, have had that experience, it's difficult for someone like me to tell them, don't listen to that person. You go to somebody else, because I can tell you this much. I've looked at the evidence. I've read it. I've discussed it with professionals. And one of the things I wanted to say is I am actually not an addiction specialist, okay? I'm not certified in addictions. I'm a general adult psychiatrist. But I have spoken with, listened to, hung around with enough addiction specialists, and I've read the book, books, articles, and so on, that I don't need to be convinced anymore. I know the evidence is there. Now, you have to understand that not all providers feel that way. Not all providers think that way or necessarily even look at the evidence. And people do get cynical. I mean, we talk about the burnout of providers with COVID, right? You probably talked about that. How many cases keep coming in, like endless waves of sick individuals coming in, you start to you start to feel powerless. You start to feel traumatized by what you are seeing. So sometimes the angry provider is just a traumatized provider, a burned out provider. We have to be compassionate towards them too, and we have to encourage them and say, hey, wait a minute, look at the evidence, study this. That little thing that you did may not have felt like you had an impact in the ER or in that clinic, but you don't know. Maybe another family member was there with them and they heard and said, Dad, I think the doctor was right. I think you should listen to that doctor. And you may never see that interaction because that happened in the elevator after they left the office. You don't know. So, my message to the providers is, please look at yourself. Please make sure that you're not treating people with addictions in this way, because they're just individuals who suffer from the same kinds of things that we all do.
And I am a person who provides treatment for those who have opiate addiction. I have my X-waiver, and I have over 100 clients who are receiving MAT services. And my commitment to that individual is that as long as you're willing to fight, I'm here to fight with you.
Exactly.
And that's how I look at it. Now we're running out of time, and I do want to get to our segment of Ask the Doctor. I have one more question, and then we're going to go to Ask.
I'll try not to be long-winded.
Ask the Doctor. Yeah. I know this might sound silly, but people sometimes state they are cured from their addiction. They have said, I don't need this treatment anymore. I've actually heard that today. Tell me how you feel about this position, and how do you handle that individual who feels that they're...
I have mixed feelings about that. I want to believe that it's possible that people can be cured. I don't know if it's true, but AA has an old saying that once a pickle, always a pickle, because you can't get the vinegar out of the pickle, But I have spoken with enough persons with addictions that I actually don't believe we are cured. I think we manage addiction the same way we manage high blood pressure and diabetes, and if you've had a stroke, you manage those things, and you're never really cured 100%. You may be on a good level of recovery and very stable and happy, and everything else is going well, and that's fantastic. But to say cured, to me, as a provider, I'm not saying for other people, but to me, sounds like complacency. I always worry when I hear that. That's a red flag for me.
Absolutely.
So, but I don't want to argue with somebody who really believes that they're cured and they're doing fine. I can't put myself in their shoes and speak for them. I don't think that's fair. But based on what I see, this is my opinion.
Okay. Well, this is a good time to pivot and go to Ask the Doctor.
Ask the Doctor.
Yeah.
All right.
So let me pull up the first question, and this one is kind of hard.
Okay.
Because there are two schools of thought in the world of addiction. It's this thought that abstinence or not using any drugs for any reason is the right way to go to to treat your addiction. So that and that's one of the things that we sometimes struggle with AA and NA and those other individuals. They're saying, hey, no medications whatsoever. You don't need Suboxone. You don't need anything. You just need this program, and that's it. Versus the other model of harm reduction. So abstinence, nothing, versus harm reduction. Tell me your views. And this is actually coming from someone who is in recovery right now.
Okay.
And I think they've been through two different sites with two different models.
Well, the hard lessons we have learned in teaching addictions are that harm reduction is important.
And maybe explain harm reduction.
And harm reduction is when, for example, MAT, you're giving somebody an opioid under controlled conditions to prevent them from using a street-based opioid. Okay? So are they technically over their addiction? Well, no, but you're managing it in a safe way. Just like needle programs, providing people with clean needles so they don't get HIV and they don't get hepatitis C and so on. These are harm reduction strategies. So when I encounter somebody, who has been using heroin for 20 years and they're smoking marijuana once a week, well, I don't think that's necessarily bad, but it depends on your value system a little bit too, because, some addictions, you can have total abstinence and be perfectly happy. But what if that addiction is sugary sweet foods? It gets a little,
Watch out.
gets a little harder. But, let's speak to another common thing, sexual addiction, right? We people struggle with this whole notion that, sex can be addictive, but I think we've been around long enough that we know there are people who have sexual addiction. Well, we don't tell those people never to have sex again. So, technically speaking, that's kind of harm reduction.
Yeah.
Don't go to the place, and don't do this and don't do that. So, I believe that harm reduction in and of itself is a worthwhile pursuit because it saves lives, it saves people from future trauma and all of that. Now, total abstinence for some people is necessary. Why? Because the minute they use substance X, Y, or Z, they're on the slippery slope to going back to where they were. And if that gateway is opened by smoking a cigarette, because we all know, for example, about paired addiction. And anybody who has to have a cigarette with their coffee knows what a paired addiction is, okay? So in the culture of addiction itself, when you're using a drug, there's other stuff that goes along with it. And, they teach you no people, places, and things.
That's right.
So if total abstinence is what you need in order to stay sober, then I say then total abstinence is for you.
That's a great way to look at it. It's open-minded.
Yes.
And I actually practice from the standpoint of harm reduction. And I don't.
As do I.
And I don't.
Right.
Demean anyone who has a different perspective.
It's okay.
But yeah, it is. Harm.
There's no harm in being abstinent.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. And then here's the next question, dear doctor. It says, the client who struggles with self-esteem, feeling judged, and can have walls up walking into treatment, how do you handle this type of complex client? What do you do to connect with this individual soul?
Well, we see that every day. Not just with addictions. We see it in mental health all the time, where people feel judged by us. And sometimes the things that we say or the way that we look or the way we respond to stuff makes people feel judged. I got to say, I've probably done it, I don't know how many times, unintentionally, not wanting to hurt anybody, but just those reactions that people get when you're encountering something maybe for the first time, and it upsets you, and you may see, the wrinkle your nose or raise an eyebrow or so on and so forth. But the reality is that sometimes addictions cause people to do things of which they are ashamed, such as, the kids going without food, such as stealing from a grandparent, and so on and so forth. So they already have things that they're ashamed of that they don't necessarily want to tell you about because they're ashamed of it. It's painful to talk about it. So when a person walks in and they have a struggle with an addiction, right or wrong, I just assume that they've already gone through something like that. And so I just tell them, I said, look, I'm not here to judge you. You're seeking treatment. I'm here to help you get treatment. What I think doesn't matter. Treatment is for you. It's not for me. It's for you. And, and my job is to help you get it, whatever I may think is unimportant. Now, they can also tell by your tone. They can also tell by how much you're willing to do in order to help them, whether you really care or not. And sometimes I gotta admit, it can be tough. If you had a whole night long in the emergency department and another person comes in and, and they want food and everything else, and you're like, oh, we all experience fatigue, okay? But fatigue is not the same as judging. So I start with open-ended questions, and I ask people questions about how they're feeling, because So if you come into, if I meet you in the hospital ward and you've just been through a horrible experience, you've just been 14 hours in the ER and you were vomiting and this, that, and the other, and I say, what medications do you take? And, and just dive in. I mean, you're going to think, this doctor doesn't care about me. And whereas if I say to you, you look like you've had a rough night. How are you feeling? Oh, okay. Oh, you care about how I feel. And then I'll say, listen, I know you're not feeling well, but if you want me to help you, there's certain things I have to know. I just have to ask you questions. I apologize if you feel bad. But if I don't have these questions answered, I can't make you feel better or help you feel better. The vast majority of the time, I'd say 99% of the time when I talk to somebody who's in withdrawal and I tell them that, they're okay with it.
Right.
They go, okay, well, thank you for, acknowledging how much pain I'm in. Because I once asked, I've asked more than one person in withdrawal from opiates, what's it like? And they'll say, well, I said, I know what the flu feels like. What's it like in comparison to the worst flu you ever had? They get 10 times worse. So I try to imagine, wow. So you got to have respect for that. And that's how I do that.
Well, I appreciate, first, I think the person struggling with addiction, they can really tell when someone's authentic. Yes.
I know. They do. They do. Yes, that is true. That is so true.
Feels, bad for me.
They got a good radar for human behavior. Yes, very much so.
But the other piece is, as I said, some people feeling judged, and not to dive too deep into this because we have another question. But
okay.
There's also this cultural piece. I know
yes.
some clients, who have, who are from the African American community that are struggling with opiate addiction, and they'll say, "Hey, this person, I went to them and they had no sympathy whatsoever."
Right.
And I think it's because of this, and I think as a group of providers, we need to kind of look at it from that standpoint.
Absolutely.
There are cultural things. There are people who might come from it from a whole different perspective.
Oh yeah.
And we just need to be careful how we address.
Oh, we have to. Somebody walks in and they look at me with my tie and my jacket, and they say, "Well, this man doesn't look like me. This man doesn't talk like me. This man obviously has money, or this or that, or Lord knows what." They walk in with assumptions, just like me. I have assumptions too. Now, granted, my assumptions will be a little bit different after doing this kind of work for a while, because I've been surprised so many times. I've seen beautiful humanity in some of the worst places I could ever imagine. So, so I say, and I mean this sincerely, I can relate to you as a human being, because fundamentally that's what I am, and that's what you are. Now, there may be persons who are traumatized by bigotry and racism, and it comes as a surprise to some that I've also been a victim of that in a number of settings. And I can tell you that I understand if they can't work with me because of what I look like and who I am. And when I see that, I'll just say, I want you to meet so-and-so. Because this person over here has lived in a neighborhood like you, knows of the struggles, and knows it on a deeper level than I do. Yes, I can understand to a point. It's true. But there's a thing in addiction treatment we call transparency, which many addicts are very appreciative. I shouldn't say addicts, but people with addiction would appreciate, which is to say, well, if you have an addiction, you understand what I go through with this addiction.
Exactly.
And so that breaks down those barriers a little bit. But you know what? I understand. If they can't work with me because of who I am, I can't always fix that.
Dr. Farber, it's funny. Sometimes when we kind of start talking with the client, I might say, I'm from East Cleveland. And as soon as they hear that, they're like, whoa, did you go to Shaw High School?
Yeah, that's right.
And then it opens the door to... Yep. We have one more question, then we got
Please, go ahead.
Close up. The last question for Ask the Doctor. Do you believe that doctors become frustrated with repeated relapse of opiate addictions or addicts and their repeated return to treatment despite despite their wanting to still get well.
Absolutely.
Do doctors struggle with that?
Absolutely. Doctors, like I said, are human beings. I used to get frustrated when I was doing internal medicine when diabetics wouldn't take their insulin or somebody with high blood pressure wouldn't take their medication. Okay, so yes, we do. The thing is, we get frustrated in part because we want to help, and when those efforts don't work, we feel our inadequacy against the power of this addiction. So we're frustrated with ourselves too. It's always important to remember that.
Right. So it's not necessarily the person; they just don't know it, but it's us because we're like
it's both.
We weren't able to say
it's
we
all
weren't
of
able
that.
to, you know.
It's all of that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, you know, Dr. Favre, believe it or not, we're almost at the end of our presentation.
Indeed.
And that hour went by fast. It was great, you know, sharing with you this time to talk about opiate treatment, aftercare, and recovery. So I thank you again for your time and wealth of knowledge and experience. I thank each of you for participating in these series of community educations and dialogue regarding opiate addiction and treatment. Hopefully we provided some additional enlightenment and information in this area. We thank the Light of Cleveland Corporation, and we would like to thank St. Timothy Missionary Baptist Church and the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, and especially the Ascension Group, the LLC that selected us to host these events.
Yes.
I don't know about you, but it was great, and I really, you know, enjoyed myself. This presentation will be aired on several platforms. First, it will be aired by the Ascension Group via Zoom on August the 25th and August the 28th from 7 to 8 p.m. The meeting ID for this is 881-5752-4817. Again, the meeting ID is 881-5752-4817, and the passcode is 2021, which is this year. If you're struggling with gaining access to the Zoom, you can reach me at Jeffrey, Jeffrey Sims, SIMS, 177@gmail.com. Again, Jeffrey Sims, one word, 177@gmail.com. Someone will be monitoring the emails for that. For the other platform, St. Timothy Missionary Baptist Church will air on Facebook, and KAZ Radio will be airing on August the 27th at 7 to 8 p.m. Again, St. Timothy Missionary Baptist Church will air on Facebook and KAZ Radio on August 27th from 7 to 8 p.m. Look for and avail yourself of these dates. I want to thank KAZ for doing a wonderful job of kind of marshaling us through this effort, shepherding us through this effort. So on behalf of the Ascension Group, I would like to thank all presenters, Dr. Farvar, all those who gave of themselves to make this successful community project. And thank you, everybody, for your rarest commodity, which is time.
Thank you
Thanks
so much.
again.
I very much appreciated this. Take care.